Good morning. Welcome to WG McLaughlin Recovery Radio, Week 3. Just a little recap of what this show is about. So, it's about understanding and preventing workplace psychological injuries. Okay? I'm working on this podcast and I'm learning the technology as I go, so bear with me. It will continue to be more refined and more professional. But what I want to get out there as soon as possible is the need for us to start thinking in terms of psychological safety for our workplaces. So I introduced the topic in the show 3 weeks ago, and the focus really right now is PTSD in the public service. And I presented research on mental health in the public services, and which demonstrated that those of us who work in public service, law enforcement, corrections, mental health, healthcare, child protection workers, military, veterans, we are at 5 times the risk of the general population of developing significant mental health conditions. And I tried to explain these findings in my own, what I've learned after over the past decade of research and working with professionals and coping with my own issues, and why we need to change. So, reminder, the focus of this show is to provide alternative perspectives for those suffering PTSD related to their work, for clinicians working with people with the conditions, and for organizations whose members are at risk. So, today I'm going to talk about one of the clinical symptoms for PTSD, but a little expand upon it and try to talk about it so that we can understand how we can learn from it and start to make it a metric for maybe our workplaces to educate about, for us to monitor in ourselves, that sort of thing. Hypervigilance. So the up and downside of it. Now the upside is a number of my clients are noticing they're doing a little bit better with our current community health threat. That is, they've said things like they feel more comfortable because now the general population knows what it's like to have PTSD, i.e., to feel fear and anxiety and threat from the simple act of going grocery shopping or running into a stranger or someone you know. They've also noted that many of us, and this is one of the reasons I'm talking about this as it relates to hypervigilance, is they like the social distancing. Many of us who've suffered physical assaults and violence, we really need our personal space. So that recommended 6 feet is perfect for people who have the condition. And you'll notice my clients have noticed that they're a little more comfortable being out now because people are keeping their distance. However, there's a lot of downsides. One is, well, I'll go through there's kind of 4 categories that hypervigilance gets broken down as a way of understanding it. So the one is the overestimation of threat. That is, we start to confuse what is possible with what is probable. It is possible our plane might go down. However, if we're anxious, overwhelmed, we'll feel it's incredibly probable. It's possible that if we go to a major sporting event, terrorists might attack, but it's not probable. But the thing is, once you get to the point of hypervigilance, you only see the threats and you live in them and identify with them. The other one is the obsessive avoidance of perceived threats. So we start avoiding everyday situations, public gatherings, empty spaces. We're just vigilantly thinking we're not safe there. And this could be for a number of reasons. For some military, like just to go walk in a park can be difficult if you've exposed to having to deal in an environment where there's landmines. Some people who have been in Afghanistan have difficulty just going on their own front lawns. The other thing is, once we have a reaction in a public situation or social one, then that in itself becomes something to avoid because it feels overwhelmed to be out of control in a place we're not used to. An increased startle reflex. For those of us who have experienced physical violence, witnessed it, been involved with it, had threats to our well being in life, after a while, we just have a reflex action. Now, I've noticed a number of people that work and are at risk in the public services. One I haven't, which is in my own background, is shelter workers. I worked at one of the largest men's shelters in North America, and daily there at that time experienced all sorts of threats to my well-being, from people trying to put a cigarette out in my eye to being threatened with dirty needles and breaking up physical confrontations, witnessing horrible things. And I noticed at one point I was at a family gathering and a cousin of mine touched me from behind. And she was taken back at my reaction, which was to turn quickly and go into defensive mode. She didn't appreciate, and I didn't fully appreciate at the time, what was happening to me, how my startle reflex was becoming pretty much my main response to anybody in my personal space. And the other thing is, because it releases certain chemicals, which is the next one, epinephrine induced physiological symptoms, when there's no real threat, we can be left disturbed and on guard for hours, days, weeks after. Once we have enough threats and we continue, remember I discussed the vagal nerves, that little heart brain that releases cortisol and adrenaline. We're on guard all the time. We stop sleeping. We can't sleep. We can't rest. We can't stop our minds, which is the other aspect of hypervigilance. I don't think many clinicians or organizations or individuals understand our cognition in hypervigilance. Cognition being how we perceive the world. So we talk about things that are prodromal symptoms. That is, there are a number of symptoms of chronic stress we live with for years, decades, before we may hit that wall of PTSD where we can't function in our jobs anymore. Many of us will be still functioning in our jobs when we've lost other aspects of our lives, the ability to not abuse substances to cope, or our relationships are gone, all sorts of things. But one of the first prodromal symptoms related to hypervigilance people will have is becoming extremely judgmental. That is, your mind starts looking for threats all the time. You become very judgmental of other people. You become very judgmental of yourself. And that judgments become so harsh, maybe you stop dealing with your in-laws or whoever you find distressing. Now, it couldn't be, maybe they don't understand your work, whatever, but it is overestimating what their judgments are. We can also be very judgmental of people if we're exposed to a particular social class of people, a particular ethnic group in our work. We may start painting everyone with the same brush. Really, when this happens, it's just a point of where we're the inability to shut our self-protection system down. The impact on our lives is far-reaching. One of the biggest ones is because we become judgmental, on guard all the time, it's such a challenge to get help. To go sit with a stranger in a room and be expected to open up about our thoughts and feelings and vulnerabilities just seems like an overwhelming task. If our friends or partners or children suggest to us we need to speak to someone, We take this as an insult or a threat, and we often won't do it. It feels so overwhelming, although it can be the best thing for us to know we won't be judged in there, to know we can start to talk and connect some of our behavior with some of our experiences in our work and maybe our lives previous to our work. The other thing it leads to over time is social withdrawal. Being judgmental, being disturbed by any potential threat, going out in public, they all lead to us naturally protecting ourselves by withdrawing from the world. However, just consolidating the system and making it harder to function. They also lead to family dysfunction. We become more judgmental of our children and partners, our family, and how they behave. We feel it's a threat to us even when it's not. We're way more reactive. And the other thing is, there's a huge disjuncture in how we overestimate threats, and they may not perceive them at all. I've had detectives who have never let their children have a sleepover because they're so impacted by the sex abuse cases they deal with. They're only trying to do their best to protect their children, but from their children's perspective, they're being cut off from the rights of being a kid and having a sleepover. They're being imprisoned, all sorts of perceptual things which set us up for some pretty intense family dysfunction as people get older and mature. So, these are all things we can start to incorporate into wellness programs for professionals. Clinicians can start to look differently at, and most importantly, those of us impacted by the condition can start to use these as kind of metrics for, am I getting worse or am I getting better? How is my work impacting me? Because many of these things will be going on for years or decades before we hit that wall where we're no longer capable to work or function. So that's my chat for today. There's my email address for questions and feedback. There's my website if you'd like to learn about me and my practice. And next week, I'll be talking about another dimension of PTSD, which gets little attention publicly in organizations, and many individuals who have it don't understand. And that is one of the prodromal aspects of amoral thinking and amoral behavior. Thank you very much. Have a good day. And please keep yourself safe.